J. Hofsnyder. Joseph Wightman and the state of Washington.
I did have, but once I got here in Florida, I went native and never wore shoes again until I was about half better grown. The first ones that I ordered myself, I ordered from Sears Roebuck. That's because that's where we got almost everything that we had in those days. And when they came through the post office, I wasn't real sure that I'd ordered the right size because I ordered them from the blank of instructions in the Sears Roebuck catalog on how to order shoes. So I opened the package right there at the post office to try them on and put if there was anything wrong that I would have had to return them. I was going to put them right back in the package and make corrections then without damaging the shoes. And naturally the neighbors, everybody met the boat in those days, was getting a laugh. They thought that that was my first pair of shoes. And once I got them on, I says, I think they'll fit, and I break them in. I was going to walk right straight out onto the beach. And the story that they told me next time they seen me was Herman Dickey said to my brother James. My brother James was delivering lumber for a house that he was building. And Herman says, I'll bet Joseph walks all the way backwards to Captiva Pass once he gets on the beach.
The Captiva Pass?
Yes, because he thought that, and James says, no, he won't, even if he walks backwards to see his tracks, because he won't get them wet in the pass that broke through Mickle's Narrows. They hadn't christened it Redfish Pass yet, but he says he isn't going to take a chance of getting his new shoes wet.
And that was just when the pass came through,
That was right shortly after the pass had broke through. And the pass broke through in 1921. So,
well, when the pass broke through, what happened to the people who had been farming on Upper Captiva? And who were they?
The last one that had farmed there that had died just before I came to the island, and it was a little bit of a mystery death, because when Tobe Bryant went up to see why he hadn't came for his mail for over a week, he found him out in the garden with one shoe and sock off.
What was this fellow's name?
His name was Foster. That was his name is on the map. I see on a lot of the charts Foster's Point, which would be named after him. He lived directly in from there, and the place where his house was fell off into the Gulf about 5 or 6 years ago. Well, it was after I had my airplane, because I was watching the green spot. You know, I called it the green spot where his garden spot was, because he left fertilizer in the ground. You know, and that showed up from the air where his garden spot was until it finally eroded into the Gulf.
Was Foster the only one who had been farming up there?
There was other people that lived up there. The one that homesteaded near the next north of Foster, which would be where what they call the Cove now. Some people called it the Pirate Cove. Some of them just called it Protection Harbor. But anyway, Powell was related to some Secretary of State at the time of Abraham Lincoln's execution and that mess, and he come down here to get away from all politics.
Yeah.
But he was a good friend of Colonel Roosevelt, because I heard Binder tell about him coming down here and hiring him to take him to town and back, where he could, of course there wasn't any town there then, that was Fort Myers.
Yeah.
But because that's as far as Teddy Roosevelt could take his horses because of water, and there was no water that he could water his horses on this side of Fort Myers, so he had to stockade them there.
Yeah.
And those that they did load, he loaded at Ponderosa for shipment to Cuba.
Yes. Now, you just mentioned the name Binder, and I know a long time ago you told me there were some people on this island whose names all began with B. That was Binder, Bates, Brainerd, and Bryant. Is that right?
That is
now,
right.
what can you tell me about Binder?
Binder, at the time I knew him, he had only had one eye. He was born in Germany, and he was shipwrecked on this island during some hurricane going toward New Orleans, and he was the sole survivor of that shipwreck, and there was nobody else on the island at the time that he was shipwrecked here. So and it was a turning point in his life. Up until then he was a very delicate person, and he must have been very finicky, particular about everything that he ate. And when he had to live from the land, he found out that it agreed with him. He put on weight and became a powerful man on this island by living what had to come naturally.
Where did he live?
He came back after as a citizen in time to homestead right here.
Well, I mean, where on the island?
After he sold this part here to Brainerd, he lived where Joe Van Fleck's house is now.
On the bay side?
On the bay side.
On the bay side.
Most people preferred to live on the bay side that was going to do fishing or farming. It wasn't much attraction to live up on that bare shell ridge, that worthless land. You know.
How did he make a living?
He had some grapefruit trees. It was produced very nicely, and then of course he raised his own garden, and he sold, let's see, this part where we are right now to Brainerd. I guess he got some money from that, and he sold the property up where I live to John Dickey. John Dickey would be the father of Ernest Dickey and Herman Dickey.
Yes.
And of course it's Ernest Dickey's wife is still living here.
Still living, yes.
Did
Did Binder live? Did Binder live to an old age?
Yes, he lived somewhere into his 90s. When he sold his last 5 acres, he sold it to C.B. Chadwick with reserving a lifetime lease because he had no heirs to leave it to. So.
And then Chadwick, that's part of South Seas Plantation land now. Then.
No, Chadwick sold it to Jan Darling. That was the parts that Darling had lived on until, Joe Van Fleck owns the spot that'd be the nearest to where Binder's house was.
And what can you tell me about Bates?
Bates was my folks bought the property that was, I think, about the last that Bates owned over here, and at that time he'd become a real estate, went into real estate business or something, and
where was this property that you bought?
Oh, it'd be out in the Gulf now. The only part of it that I could find at all would be a small spot, maybe where our landing was, in on the bay side, which would be where the road cuts around through the mangrove swamp on its way to South Sea Plantation now.
I see. Now, how about Bryant?
Bryant, the fellow that was probably helped the original homesteader was William Bryant. William Bryant homesteaded the property adjoining Binder. Now, where they just changed the road from Sunset Drive up there back to something else was a they twisted the section line and made it what they called an agreed section line, so as both those homesteaders would have some Gulf property and both of them have some Bay property, because this section line was splitting the island the wrong way to suit them, so they redivided their property from the way it would have laid on the homestead.
That would be about where the curve is, where Mrs. Strand used to live.
Where Mrs. Strand lives would put you on. There's one of those streets right now. Before they changed them, there was one street that was called Binder. Is a different street than what they've got the stack on now.
Yes.
And the one that they used to call Sunset was the one that was on the agreed section line.
I see. Well, you know, we have a street on the island named for Binder now.
Yes, but it's in a different place than what the other Binder Street was.
Yes.
They got I don't know whether the people distributing signs was confused or whether they readjust them. Well, it doesn't make any difference. His name will be remembered probably on the.
That's right. Now, how about Brainerd? I know that's a famous name here.
Yes.
With a lot of descendants still here.
You'll find several of their names on tombstones up in the cemetery. The surviving of that blood lineage would be Beulah Wiles's children now. Gordon Brainerd was Beulah's father, and he.
Well, was this the original Brainerd, Gordon?
Gordon Brainerd was the son of the original Brainerd.
Of the original.
In other words, that would be 1, 2, 3. That'd be 3 generations down to Beulah, and
well, was Beulah's name Brainerd or Gore?
Her maiden name was Brainerd.
Brainerd.
Yeah.
Well, who was Gore?
Gore was Hattie Brainerd's second husband. After her first husband died, she remarried, and that was A.M. Gore, and A.M. had a son by a previous marriage, Paul M. Gore, and so we, to make a joke out of it, we called one of them A.M. and P.M., forenoon and afternoon Goers, you know, for...
Yes. Now, you mentioned one day, you told me someone named Brewer.
Yes.
On this island. You told me something about
Brewer.
What was it?
Brewer was a son-in-law of Tobe Bryant, and their children, for some reason or other, liked the smell of gasoline.
What were the children's names?
Lawton was a boy's name, and Lola was the girl's name.
Why did they like gasoline?
That I don't know. I can't figure out why there's some of these people that they call snifters now that get high on. But that was probably a forerunner of some people that like odd things. That's just some of those things don't make sense to me. Like, for example, here, these people that were taking cocaine to get paralyzed that they was making a run on here. That doesn't make sense.
Where would they sniff the gasoline?
It was it crawled up on top of a Ford tractor. You see, their gasoline tank was directly over the engine, gravity paid, and took the cap off and stuck the nose in the gas cap, and nobody was around to wake them up when they become unconscious, where they'd die. Well, you see, gasoline and ether are related. It's a matter of how much of the high test fumes you draw out of it in whatever they do to break it down and cause it off. And an overdose of some of those things will, instead of just putting a person to sleep, will kill them.
Did both of these children die from sniffing gasoline?
That was a little bit confusing because Lola died when I was gone, but they somewhere or other when I got back, A.M. Gore says they both died the same way, so I didn't know, and died almost the same, not very far apart. So I don't know whether she got on top of a tractor same as her brother did.
You're just not sure.
No, I didn't.
You told me your middle name was Benema. How do you spell that?
B-E-N-E-M-A.
And you said it was an Indian name. How'd you ever get it?
That was a dirty trick that an Indian played on my father. My father was trying to find out the Indian word for rainbow. And of course the Indian either didn't understand him or, but he gave him the words as would have made sloppy weather. So I guess I might be the original Sloppy Joe.
Now, let's come back to Redfish Pass. I'd like to know, what did you call that pass when it first broke through?
We called it Mickles Place because because we, prior to that, we had called that Mickles Narrows. You see, John Mickles' house was just on the other side of where the pass broke through.
On Upper Captiva side?
On the upper, what would be Upper Captiva now.
Yes.
Of course, at that time it was all one island.
Uh-huh. And then when did the name change from Mickles Pass to something else?
1923, some officials came out from Fort Myers and had a big party there, and let's see, Dr. Miles was in on it, and some of the guides was there, and at that time they had such a large redfish run that they couldn't get a hook past the redfish hardly to catch anything else. The redfish was so thick, so somebody thought since the pass was red with redfish, they'd call it Redfish Pass. Of course, we've never had that kind of a redfish run again.
So that pass was named in 1923?
Yes.
I see.
It was being used as a pass 2 years before it was christened and officially named Redfish Pass.
Now, you just told me that Mickles lived close to where the pass is at the present time. Now, as we come south from the pass, can you remember the houses and the people who lived right in order from there down?
3 houses that belonged to the Carters, and their old packing shed was still there right up until a few years ago. That's where the help quarters built now. Let's see, there was Knight Carter, James Carter, and Jess Carter. Jess Carter's house was made over into what was the kitchen, and they built out the dining room end onto it, and
South Sea?
South Sea Plantation. Mm-hmm. Now the next house north of that, the way it sits now, was the schoolhouse that was brought in from where we went to school, because after they moved it back 3 or 4 times until it was all on Chadwick's property, and he picked that up for salvage and built that over into the Huckleberry Cottage.
So then there were 3 houses. Now, who was south of the Carters?
At that time, the next one south of the Carters would be Tobe Bryant's house. That would be where it was called the Minor House now. At that time, it was Bay property. Now it's Gulf property.
I see. Then who was next south of the Manor House?
Next one south from there was Philip Knowles, and of course his would be way out in the Gulf now, because he was built in the center of the island, and the next one south of Knowles would be the Bates property. That's the property that my folks had tried to buy and didn't quite pay for before they lost all their fruit in 1919 hurricane. The next one on this side of there was a Smith property, and let's see, then we'd get into this subdivision that was where Bish's house fell into the Gulf, and where cars moved their house away from, and there was 6 houses once in what was Ziegler subdivision. That, the only house that's left there now is the one that's on stilts out in the Gulf, and the only part of that property that's left is on the just a little bit at the road touches.
I see. Now, coming south from there, what housing was there?
From there, the next one south was Miss Brown. It would be at the end of Palm Avenue. And
On the Gulf?
Yes, that'd be on the Gulf, and there was no houses on the bay side until you get clear over to Sanchez. Sanchez was where Mrs. Weeks lives now, and then on this side of Weeks's would be the place that was Binder's then. It would be where Van Vleck lives now.
Yes.
And then the next one on this side of there would have been Captain Fadley, and then the hotel property.
Where was the hotel?
The hotel burned down right, well, it's where those condominiums are now that belong...
Right there.
Yes.
When was the hotel built?
It was built before I came to the island. I guess it was built there by somebody by the name of Lane. And Lane died, and he had a heavy mortgage on it to Dr. Miles, and they let everything go to pay off the mortgage, but the one house and lot that Mrs. Lane reserved, it would be where Bob Sabantino lives now, is still the house that was used to belong to Mrs. Lane.
I see. Then when the hotel burned, was there a dock where Andy's place became Andy's place?
At that time, the city dock was just about rotting down by then, and Andy built a foot dock right along the side of the one, and he built it so as to be just barely off of the street end, so it'd be his own dock. But the old city dock, just before that, we could drive a truck right out onto it to load up with the ice and things. And when I first came to the island, of course, there was one of those push hand cars went out onto it. The thing was 6 foot wide, the walkway, but had a narrow gauge track on top of it. The people load the ice onto the hand car, push that ashore, and then have to take it off the hand car onto the mule car.
Where did the ice come from?
Punta Gorda ice plant. I don't know when that was built there. It was built there long before I came. See, the Punta Gorda Fish Company used to run the ice on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, and pick up the fish going the other way on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays.
Uh-huh.
And that was their regular run. They would deliver ice all the way to Estero Bay, house down in there, and this was one of their stops. One of their stops, yes.
Well, now let's go back to the old times. We've gotten off the topic a little. South of where that dock was, which is now Andy's, what housing was south of that?
The house where Andy is living right now is built by Tom Alderman. Prior to that, let's see, the John Norris used to own the mule was the dray line, was lived right where Twin Palm Cottages are now. And then from there wasn't anything till you get clear to the post office.
Well, and where was the post office?
Post office was, well, that buoy is right, and it was put up with a fish pole and the fish pond around it originally in the yard of the post office built, all right? So
Just past Timmy's Nook?
yes.
Yes. Was that post office located where those new houses have just been built?
Yes,
Or was it past
well,
that?
it'd be past part of them, but they'd be on this side of one of them that was built about 6 or 8 years ago. The
That was the jet house,
yes,
Yes.
so it'd be right in
right in that area.
I don't know whether you can still find part of the cement cistern or whether they knocked it down and took it out too. But there was they built a big concrete cistern at the end of where the old house.
Well, then between Andy's dock and the post office and the area we're sitting in now, were there any houses in here?
No
at all?
houses in here at all. From
None
the
at
time
all.
you left the chapel that way, or from John Norris's this way, clear to the post office, there's no house in here at all.
And then what was past the post office?
And the next one beyond the post office would be Snyder's School, which was where Belton Johnson lives.
And that was a school for boys?
The school was for boys. They were a boarding school that operated through the wintertime. They went someplace else through the summertime, and
About when was that school built?
that I do not know, because it was there when I came here, and it was discontinued during the time that these islands become bootleggers' headquarters, during Prohibition, because the boys was getting a little bit too much to drink at times.
And what was beyond the school now, south of the
The
school?
next one south of there would be John Dickey's house, Dr. Dickey's, and then beyond that was the next house was Dr. Hicks, and then let's see, Captain Smith had 4 cottages that was for part of them was for rentals, and then let's see, Jagger's place, and then where Price's built the Twin
Waters.
Yeah, that was
Now going down the bay side from what is now Tween Waters, were there any more houses between there and the bridge?
yes, there was either 2 or 3 houses. Doc Turner homesteaded right where the that slow S curve is, and then he sold a place that was to a fellow by the name of John Schultz, and that man. Well, both of those men were so deaf that they'd have to stand up to each other and holler, so everybody else could hear them in the country to get in on any conversation.
Now, from that point down Roosevelt Pass, were there any other things down as far as Blind Pass?
Nothing again
Nothing at
then
all.
until, let's see, the next house would be across on Sanibel, which would be where Stella Mitchell lived.
Yes. Now, how about on the bay side, on the Gulf side, from the post office south? Was there anything built in there?
Nothing on the, let's see, beyond the Prices, there was nothing on the Gulf front from there south on Captiva at all.
Nothing.
Nothing.
That was no good property.
That was that worthless property. But when we children during turtle season, if we'd walk that beach, we'd pass one of these houses that was set back a quarter of a mile off of the beach, and the deaf men, that couldn't hear anything. And we'd always somebody say, well, let's be very respectful of those old people and not wake them up. And we usually would have a minute's meditation as we went past wherever their trail came out to the beach. Of course, we knew that we'd have to go in and shake either full or the doctor in order to wake them up in case we had to wake them up, but we wouldn't. But it was just one of the jokes amongst the children of we was respectful to the aged.
Of your elders, that's good.
Yeah.
Now, could you tell me, coming from Redfish Pass south, where were the groves and what kind were they that were located on Captiva?
That would be almost impossible to explain from what's there now, because everything that was there now, with the respect of the Minor House, wasn't there. You see, the house,
Yes.
his grove would start west of where that house is, and he farmed 3 ridges between there and what he called Protection Ridge. Protection Ridge would be the 4th one out, and some of those was pretty broad sloughs, and in between those ridges.
And what was growing there on
They had grapefruit groves, and they used to raise their own syrup, so they usually had a cane patch someplace. And they had 2 different kinds of cane that they grew on the island. One of them was the ribbon cane, and the other one was the sugar cane that they would make into make their own syrup, you see,
yeah.
out of the...
Now that was a grapefruit grove, and then coming south from that, what was the next grove?
Next one would be Knowles's, and of course that's all out in the Gulf.
And what was
No.
that? Limes?
Well, he had grapefruit, and then he usually had some truck garden. Either he raised a big crop of peppers, bell peppers, one year, and a crop of tomatoes, and one year he raised a patch of peanuts.
Peanuts. Now, coming south from that, what was the next grove
Next
on
place
the
was the place where I lived. That'd be over on the... again, all I could find left of that property would be just a very small strip on the bay side. It's hard to visualize what these islands are unless I can show you on an old, a 1918 survey or older, because
Maybe we
this
can
thing's
get hold
moved
of one.
over.
was there anything south of that then? In this area that we're in now, was there anything?
The place just where you turn to go through that gate to get into South Sea Plantation went into Bryant, old William Bryant's grove, and then after the grapefruit were killed out, Chadwick replanted it to a lime grove, and there's still a few lime trees that are growing in
Yes,
there.
I know there are.
And
then coming from that, was there anything now between
then
there and
let's
the
see,
bridge?
from there turn straight toward the bay was Sanchez had the place. Would be just west of all that, just west of where Mrs. Weeks' house was a pretty good, it was a small grove, but was raised a real nice grapefruit there. And then the next one on this side of there would be right back into Binders. And then from here south, there was nothing on this, because from Price's south was that worthless shell ridges again, where they would cost too much to
Well,
raise.
now with all of these groves, they must have had to hire people to pick. Where did they start? Did they start at that end of the island and come down, or did they pick them all together, or what?
The part of them shipped through Punta Gorda, and they'd bring in a lighter.
Go ahead.
A lighter that they would load, and they didn't hire outside help very much. We could divide the work up amongst us, and we'd go camping right where we happened to work. Nobody, at that time there was no transportation other than walking, so we wouldn't go 25 to 50 miles to do a day's work like people do nowadays. We went and camped right at the grove, put up a tent and if there happened to be a few mosquitoes around, our greatest protection against mosquitoes at that time was smudge pots. And well, on the other thing I was telling about cooking up the purloo, that's when when I'd get away from home, and we'd only go home then on weekends. You see, or else we'd stay right there until we worked out one grove, or got the lighter load or boat loaded, or whichever, and then we'd move to the next one.
And you'd work all the way. You'd work all the way down the island.
Yes.
And then would you go from here over to Sanibel to continue this picking?
If that's where we could make a few dollars, yes. And if we could make it closer to home, why, we wouldn't go that far. There'd sometimes be a crew picking on down there and another crew picking up here.
I see.
But it wasn't always that way. It'd be the other thing was the grapefruit that we raised on these islands was ripened about 2 weeks earlier than on mainland for some reason or other. And when the people had their own packing list, the early fruit would bring a little bit better price, which would justify paying that extra to bring the fertilizer out to the islands. But once they incorporated, where it had to go through incorporated packing houses, that hurt that system something terribly, because there was some of the people that got a hold of the packing houses that used island fruit to top out with, put good fruit on top of the boxes. So next year nobody north would buy the early fruit. Well, without getting a premium price, the islanders couldn't stay in business and compete with mainland, because from then on, you see, they started putting more groves mainland. But when the people settled Florida, they settled around the edges first. And all that's over in the central part of the state was developed since then. And matter of fact is, there wasn't even a road across the state until in the 20s. In about 1923, there was a safari started out of about 23 cars from Fort Myers, and I think it was something like 16 of them finally made it on to Miami about a month or month and a half later. It was they'd drive from picking their way through the palmetto patches, and they called themselves the Explorers. You can probably find that in part of the history of Fort Myers, the adventure they made, but all this modern transportation has come up since.
I guess so. Now, with all these groves on the island, there was hardly room for anything else. Was the century plant on the island?
The century plant was growing along the some of the high shell ridges on Sanibel, and well, a few on this island. They were pretty well cleaned out once for hemp rope. That the hemp factory was at where they call St. James City now, and that had gone about out of business by the time I came. That went about the time I came, and the reason for it was that they got bringing the rope in from Philippines. Manila rope, they claimed, didn't rot quite as quick as the Sicily hemp, and they could get it cheaper because the Filipinos, instead of having a minimum wage of $1 a day, where they was working for something like 10 cents a day, and their 10 cents was only worth half what our 10 cents is.
Well, what part of the century plant could you use to make rope?
The leaf, mainly. They crush the sap out of it. You can walk out here and pick up any of them, and then they, well, some people call our Spanish bayonet here is the Seminoles called made. It has a real fine hemp in it. Some people referred to it as the silkweed. it can be made into cloth. It's such a fine fiber.
How long did that rope factory operate?
That I don't know. I'd have to get the data on that. Well, after all, I was still a child, you might say, when that.
I see.
Yeah.
Now, I
When that was
understand there was
going
a
up.
circuit rider used to come around here. Do you remember him?
I remember Reverend Gatewood very
Gatewood?
well. Reverend Gatewood that's the only. I never did learn what his first name was, but I read a couple of his books. He was a reporter for a paper in Punta Gorda for a good many years, and he was a census taker and a licensed preacher, so he was a twofold person. He could do the blessing and write out the certificates of birth and the certificates of death, and keep the census records all in one man. Of course, we didn't have much population then compared with what we had now. I guess it'd be impossible for one man to keep track of the west coast of Florida.
Was he able to perform marriages?
Oh yes, he was the. There was another person on Sanibel that homesteaded there, Reverend Stawley, that was performed a lot of the marriages, and but I never did hear him preach a sermon. He was an Episcopal preacher, retired.
Did Reverend Gatewood ever marry anybody on Captiva? Perform any marriage ceremonies?
The last one that I knew him get to was the Brown, when one of the Brown married a Caraway. Sam Caraway used to, his work was a peninsula of Sanibel, but when the pass whipped around and cut into Clam Bayou, it made it into what a lot of people call Silver Key now.
Yes, I know.
But that was once. If you walk across Silver Key, you'll still find the sweet potato rows out there, the little ridges where that country was farmed.
Well, when Gatewood came here, when Reverend Gatewood came, did he have any services for the people on the island?
At the chapel by the sea, he usually tried to come about every fourth Sunday, and then of course he'd be at St. James one Sunday, and someplace near Og occasionally. It's
Well, he came here to the chapel by the sea. When was that chapel built?
well, it was a schoolhouse when I came here, but it was made over into a chapel later, as it ceased becoming a schoolhouse. Then the Islanders took up a collection of some kind and made it into a community church. Now we used the term community church because I think the most that we ever had at that time that belonged to the same church, if you count them, what they were baptized to or originally, was about 5 members. I think they, well, it was sometimes a close toss-up whether it was the Baptist or Methodist that had the most, but the chapel by the sea was held out open to all Christ-believing denominations. And it was not necessarily always on Sunday, because the Seventh-day Adventists even used it for a while.
Well, now the present chapel by the sea that is here, was that the same building that
Part
you're
of it
talking
is
about?
the same building. And
That used to be a schoolhouse.
yes, the one end of it is still the same boards in it.
But then it was added to?
Yes, we've added to the south end, and
Well,
I
that's
did the additional wiring onto it, and Ira Johnson did the main part of the carpentering work. And then, of course, we built that little branch off out to the east side, little arm onto it, which wasn't originally there.
That's probably one of the oldest buildings left on the island then, isn't it?
It could very easily be.
Mm-hmm.
Unless it'd be some of the buildings down through Dickeyville, it could still be there.
Uh-huh. That's interesting. Well, Joe, I think we've talked long enough today. I don't want to wear you out every time we sit down, so let's check it off for a little while. Okay?
Okay.